Today, we're diving into the Kisan Sabha movement. Now, if you're studying modern Indian history, this is a really big deal. It's a powerful story about a peasant uprising that took place in the Awadh region between 1918 and 1921. It really gets to the heart of agrarian distress, colonial economics, and how resistance can bubble up from the grassroots.
So, the big question is, why? What was it that drove the peasants of Awadh to finally rise up? What were the forces at play that pushed them to take on not just the powerful local landlords, but the British colonial state itself? Let's unpack it.
Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll get a bird's-eye view of the uprising. Then we'll dig into what was causing all the distress. After that, we'll see how the peasants got organized into Kisan Sabhas, look at the internal conflicts that came up, and finally, we'll cover how the movement wound down and what it all meant in the long run.
All right, so first things first, let's set the scene. The Kisan Sabha movement was this huge, peasant-led struggle right in the heart of the Awadh region. And it's so important to get this. This wasn't just some random riot. Nope. This was an organized response to a system of exploitation that had been in place for a long, long time.
And you know, the peasants were really fighting a war on two fronts here. On one side, you had the British government, always demanding more and more land revenue. And on the other, you had the local landlords, these guys called talukdars, who are basically the enforcers on the ground. It was a double whammy for the farmers.
So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of why these peasants were in such distress. The oppression they faced, it came from two directions that were totally connected, and together they were just systematically crushing the peasantry.
Just look at these numbers. They tell a really clear story. In 1858, the British collected £15 million in land revenue. By 1912, that had jumped to $20 million. Now, the problem wasn't just that the number was going up, it was that the government wasn't putting anything back in. No investment in better farming, no new irrigation, nothing. They were just squeezing more and more money out of the same system, and the farmers were hitting a breaking point.
And that brings us to the second layer of this whole mess, the talukdars. The British empowered these landlords, and they used that power to get as much as they could from the tenant farmers. We're talking about all kinds of abuses. Kicking people off their land for no reason, charging insane renewal fees, even making up illegal fees for things like weddings and demanding free labor. It created this constant state of fear and uncertainty.
One of their biggest weapons was this thing called badakli. Basically, it's the constant threat of eviction. Imagine, you're a tenant farmer working a piece of land your entire life, but you have zero security. You could be kicked off at any time, for any reason. It was the ultimate way to keep people in line and crush any kind of dissent.
And as if that wasn't enough, there was also Nazrana. Think of it as a huge, totally arbitrary fee or gift the landlord would demand just to let you keep farming your land. It wasn't part of the official rent. It was just pure extortion that pushed peasants deeper and deeper into debt.
But here's the thing. When you push people that hard, eventually they start to push back. All of this suffering actually planted the seeds for organized resistance. The peasants, who had been dealing with this all alone, started to find a way to speak with one collective voice.
And the spark really came from the Home Rule League. Activists from the league started going out into the villages, holding these meetings, these sabhas. And it was in these gatherings that the light bulb went on for a lot of peasants. They started talking, sharing their stories, and realized, hey, this isn't just happening to me, it's happening to everyone. That shared understanding, that was the foundation for the Kisan Sabha, which got started in 1918.
And the organization had this really interesting mix of leadership. It was founded by local leaders like Gauri, Shankar, Mishra, and Inder Narayan Dwivedi, but it also got support from big-name nationalist figures like modern Mohan Malavia. Having that kind of backing from the national stage gave the movement a ton of legitimacy and momentum.
The growth was just incredible. By 1919, just 1 year after it started, the Kisan Sabha had set up 450 branches across the province. 450! That tells you this wasn't just a small protest anymore. It had exploded into a genuine mass movement.
But right when the movement was at its strongest, it hit a major roadblock, an internal one. When Mahatma Gandhi launched the nationwide non-cooperation movement in 1920, it created a huge debate within the Kisan Sabha, a split that would end up fracturing the whole thing.
The whole argument really boiled down to one question. What's the strategy? One group, let's call them the localists, said, look, our main problems are right here. High rents, badakli, Nazrana. The national movement isn't focused on our specific economic problems. But the other group, the nationalists, argued,
No, we have to join with Gandhi's bigger struggle. The peasant cause and the national cause are the same fight.
Well, they couldn't agree, and this disagreement led to a formal split. In October 1920, the faction that wanted to focus on local issues broke away and formed their own organization, the Awadh Kisan Sabha. This new group was all about tackling the specific problems of the Awadh peasantry, separate from the bigger nationalist agenda.
And that brings us to the final phase of the movement, its decline. So how did such a powerful protest eventually fall apart? Let's trace the series of events that led to its end.
Things started to unravel pretty quickly in 1921. Some of the protests turned violent, peasants started looting markets and granaries. This gave the British government the perfect excuse to come down hard. The police launched a severe crackdown. But at the same time, the government did something clever. They passed the Awadh Rent Act, a bill that offered a few concessions and a little bit of relief. This was enough to calm down the more moderate peasants. So you see, it was this classic carrot-and-stick approach. Brutal suppression on one hand and minor reforms on the other. And it worked. It completely dismantled the movement's unity.
So, this leaves us with a really important question to think about. Was the Kisan Sabha movement a failure since it was suppressed by 1921, or was it actually a crucial lesson for the future? You know, it showed the incredible power of organized peasants, but it also highlighted just how tricky it is to merge local economic problems with big national goals. At the end of the day, the movement might have faded, but it laid the groundwork for future peasant struggles, which would become a massive force in the fight for independence.